Welcome to the Unfiltered Show from the Score Studios. My name is Joseph Casciaro. I'm joined by Joe Wolfond here. Wolfond, we're sitting here a day after the Boston Celtics officially regained their title as the winningest team in NBA history, 18th championship. When you think about this particular Celtics team and how dominant they were, was there really ever any doubt?
I think it's one of those things where it feels very inevitable in hindsight, given just how dominant they were during the regular season, the record they compiled, going 16-3 through the playoffs. But I think there were moments where there was doubt, at least about how they would handle whichever team came out of the West. I think the path through the Eastern Conference was pretty clear for them, especially with all the injuries that befell pretty much every other Eastern Conference playoff team. But I think there were moments when maybe it looked a little bit hazy, especially at the offensive end for them. But they answered every single question, and at the end of the day, 80-21 regular season and playoffs combined. Top 5 or 6 net rating all time during the regular season. By any objective measure, one of the great seasons in NBA history, and certainly in Celtics history. So that's how they're going to be remembered at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I know everyone kind of clowns them for the competition that they played, but at the end of the day, few teams in history have been as good relative to their competition in a given year as the Celtics were this year. Now, Wolfond, you and I don't know what it's like to share a locker room with members of this Boston Celtics team, but our guest today does, because joining us today on the Unfiltered Show, 2014 number 8 overall pick, 2014 Big Ten Player of the Year, enjoyed an 8-year pro career, and was a member of the Boston Celtics the last time they went to the finals in 2022. Nik Stauskas, thanks so much for joining us.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk some hoops with you.
Yeah, as are we. Funny story for you, Nik. We have actually shared the court together before. I think it was back in 2017, your first charity game that you did here at my old alma mater, now Toronto Metropolitan University, and I was on your team in that charity game. And funny enough, I really didn't know what the hell I was doing out there and what to do, so I just came up and tried to set a screen for you at one point, and you did splash a 3. So my story that I tell people is I recorded a screen assist for a pro baller at the time.
Hey, man, whatever you can do to get on the scoreboard and help your team win, that's all that matters.
That's right.
That is funny. That was for my grandmother's charities for IPF, and no, I appreciate you coming out and being a part of that game. That was a fun night.
Yeah, it was. All about the intangibles here.
Can confirm, having shared a court with you, that you certainly do not know what you're doing out there.
All right. Nik, so as I mentioned, you shared a locker room. You were on the Celtics the last time they made the finals, and you were on a team with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford was there, Derek White was already there, Joe Mazzulla was then, I believe, the 4th assistant on the coaching staff. So what are your memories of being part of this core, like being a member of a team that had this core, and how have you seen them growing over the last couple of years, I guess?
Well, first off, I'll start by saying it was really a lot of fun to see them get over the hump last night and finally win that championship, because from my time in 2022, I already felt like the Celtics were the best team in the NBA, and same goes for last year when they lost to Miami in the conference finals. I thought they were still the best team in the league. So for them to finally get over the hump and see that joy and excitement on their face last night, just was so happy for them, because I know how hard they've worked. But my experiences there were phenomenal. I joined the team in March of 2022, so it was later on in the season. And, luckily for me, the team had really caught their stride by that point. They started off the year, I think, around 500 after 30, 40 games. And then the second half of the season, they were the hottest team in the league. So when I came in, it was good vibes only. There was no drama. There was no, everyone had figured out their role and played that. And so it was just a cool experience for me coming in from the G League, and then bam, getting a chance to win a ring against an all-time dynasty in the Golden State Warriors. And, for me, like I said, I still believe that we were the better team that year, but it goes to show that experience does play a huge factor in closing out games and winning championships. And I think that was really the biggest thing when I look at the difference of this team that won this year versus when I was there in 2022. People forget Tatum was 24 years old when I was there in 2022. And the one story that I could kind of give you that will maybe give you some perspective as to why experience is so important. Game 4 against the Warriors was in Boston. And I'll never forget this moment. We're up 2-1 with a chance to go up 3-1 at home, TD Garden, the place is rocking. And I believe we were down 1 point with 3 or 4 minutes left to go. And a timeout was called. And I'll never forget this. We come back into the huddle, and it wasn't that we were scared or, no one was arguing or anything, but in our huddle, there were so many different voices yelling out so many different directions, and everyone was very tense. Like, you could feel the gravity of the moment. We knew that we needed to win this game in order to win this championship. And I just felt this anxiety from our group. And when I looked over at the other end of the court to the Warriors bench, because I was in my warm-ups. I'm not inside the huddle. I'm kind of on the outside of the huddle. I look at the other end, and this dude, Steph Curry, had his arms crossed and his foot kicked up against the scores table. Like, he wasn't even really in the huddle, was so calm, like just no worry in the world. And that was the first time where I was like, this might not go our way. And sure enough, we came out of that timeout and Steph banged 2 threes back to back and pushed it to like a 6 or 7 point game. And we go on to lose game 4. So the series is tied 2-2. And, to the casual fan, they probably think, oh, it's still anyone's series. I can promise you, we went back to the locker room and no one said it, but everyone could feel it, that we were not going to win that series after that game. Like, there was just that in the air, you could just tell that was our chance and we missed it. And that was that part for me where I was like, man, there's really levels to this in terms of the experience. Like, those guys on the other end, they've been in that position year after year after year, and it was just another game for them. It was a big game, but just another game. And for us on the Celtics, it was like the most important game we've ever played. You could feel that anxiety. And I think when you look at this team this year, that was really the difference. Was they had now been there, they had matured, they had grown, and that group had stayed together. And so now there was that familiarity with the situation, and maybe those nerves weren't as big this time around. And, they were calm, cool, and collected in winning that series last night.
So just taking it back to that series, I mean, you mentioned you felt like you guys were the best team in the NBA that season. You are up 2-1. I think had a decent-sized lead in the fourth quarter of that game 4 and kind of let it slip through your fingers. At the end of that series, when you lose game 6, what is the vibe like in the locker room? What kind of conversations are guys having? And what is the journey from kind of point A to B, from that moment to the moment last night where a lot of those same guys are celebrating, popping champagne together?
Well, the thing was that when we lose that game 6 at home and, the locker room, there was no conversations. The locker room was quiet and guys were crying. And it was such a sad moment. And to make matters worse was with how quiet the locker room was, you could hear the celebrations from the other side of the tunnel, from the Warriors entering their locker room. And it just, putting salt on the wounds. Like, it really stung for a lot of those guys. And for me, like, I was pretty new to the team. And I wasn't really playing a lot. So it hurt for me, but I could just see like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, those guys who had just poured their blood, sweat, and tears into it. Marcus Smart was another one. Like, they were just crushed. And just, you think about all you go through that season and all the, playing through injuries and the ups and downs, and, have it end in that way when you truly believe you're the better team. It was a tough pill to swallow for those guys. And again, I think that's why it just makes it so much sweeter when you finally do get over the hump after a couple years of coming up short, because you know how hard it is to achieve that. Like, you've felt those lows, and so the highs are just that much more enjoyable.
Nik, I wanted to ask you what your impressions were of Joe Mazzulla back then, because like I said, I believe he was the 4th assistant, they said last night, the last time the Celtics made the finals. So I mean, from your perspective, like, could you see at all that this guy had head coaching material in the future? Was he always this deadpan and like about his on-court business as he is now?
So it's really funny. When I first got to the team, I didn't know who Joe was at all. He introduced himself to me, and the thing we shared in common was that he had played for John Beeline at West Virginia, and I had played for John Beeline at Michigan. And so we shared that in common, and I got to know him a little bit better throughout the playoffs. For most teams in the playoffs, you have that rotation of guys that are playing in the games, and then you have the guys that are not really getting in unless it's garbage minutes. And so in practice, we would have what's called a low minute group, and the low minute group is more so on practice days. They're scrimmaging, they're staying sharp, they're staying ready in case their number gets called or an injury happens and they have to check into a game. And Joe, this is when I learned how crazy Joe was. Joe would play in the low minute group, because sometimes we're only playing like 3-on-3 or 4-on-4, and it's an odd number. You need one coach or two coaches to step in to kind of like make the numbers work. And Joe was always volunteering to come into these games, and there was no player or coach that would talk more trash and play more physically than Joe Mazzulla would. And I was like, man, this guy is nuts. Like, this guy is crazy. But in terms of actually coaching and having his input on the team, he was sitting behind the bench at that time. So I didn't really think of him as a front runner or a guy that was having a lot of input into things. But when we played Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals that year, for some reason, all of a sudden we were going through Miami Scout and going through their plays and practice, and Joe Mazzulla was solely responsible for the Miami Scout. Like, he was the only coach that was talking about, their tendencies, their plays, their sets, everything. And so for me, I thought it was a little bit strange, because I'm like, why are we having this guy that's sitting behind the bench, run through the entire scout in the Eastern Conference Finals? Like, it's pretty important, of a series. So, but he was so confident and so vocal in the way he was delivering his message that it kind of took me back, where I was like, damn, this guy could be a coach one day. And again, I didn't know it was going to happen that soon at that time. But that was the first time for me where I was like, wow, one, they must really trust him in this organization to give him that role to handle the scout. And two, good for him in being able to just step up and confidently deliver the message and properly prepare for that matchup. So, for him to finally get that opportunity and, win that championship, he's this, I think, other than Bill Russell, the youngest coach to lead his team to the championship. And something that stood out to me yesterday about him that's, might go unnoticed by a lot of people, but I think Joe really does. He believes in his guys and he puts them in a position to succeed. And a perfect example of that is the end of the second quarter when he put Peyton Pritchard into the game with 4 seconds left. Like, talk about knowing your guys and knowing how to get the best of them. And I'm not going to sit here and say, he knew Peyton Pritchard was going to hit that three, but he knew out of everyone on that roster, there's a bunch of other guys that don't want to take that shot. They don't want to mess up their field goal percentage. They don't want to take on the rest. But Peyton does. And he not only wants to, but he makes them. And so for him to not play the whole first half and get put in and nail a 50-footer to end the half, like, to me, that was good on Peyton Pritchard for hitting that. But also, you got to tip your hat to Joe Mazzulla for just understanding where to put him in that moment.
Yeah, that's got to be like the most hyper specialized role, like the 50-foot heave. I mean, obviously Peyton Pritchard was great at points throughout the playoff run in many ways. Like, he had possessions in the finals switching on to Luka and standing him up. Like, I love Peyton Pritchard, but just in like that moment for him to come in, as he'd done. When was the other game in which he hit that heat? Was that,
I think, game 2?
Yeah,
it was in Boston as well. I think,
yeah, to just like come in for that specific shot. And I've like, heard people talking about how that's a shot that he works on a ton and he's super confident that he can make it. So that was unbelievably cool to see. Nik, I guess kind of like a two-part question for you, just to take it back to your time with the team, and I guess differences between the team then and now. Obviously, personnel changes with Drew and Kristaps coming in, Rob Williams, Marcus Smart going out. But you talked a lot about sort of the difference in mindset, or I guess in experience and attitude that comes along with that between you guys and the Warriors in that series. And thinking about maybe what changed for the Celtics from 2022 to 2024, how much of that do you feel like is just the experience factor and maybe a mentality shift versus, like tactically, I don't know how much really changed for them. Like I think especially defensively, you guys were playing sort of like the same scheme in 2022, like switching 1 through 4 and like cross matching your center. In that case, Rob Williams and like now Porzingis. But is there stuff you've seen, whether it's tactically or just in terms of like the way that Jason and Jalen have evolved as players that accounts for that shift? Or do you think it more so comes down to just having been in that moment and knowing how to handle it better mentally the second time around?
No, I think you're right on that. In terms of, did they make these huge quantum leaps in their ability or their game planning? Or no, for the most part, I think things are the same. And you mentioned a couple of the roster changes. Obviously, that's key. Drew Holiday and Marcus Smart are the same, same kind of player in terms of great defensive ability, can score as well. I'd go on to say maybe Drew's a little bit more of an actual point guard than Marcus is. And obviously the addition of Porzingis was huge, although he was hurt for a lot of the playoffs this year. I will say, and I don't want to take anything away from this Celtics team because I do think they've been the best team for 3 years. But also a huge difference is the fact that Steph Curry was Steph Curry in 2022. Like we talk about Game 4, that Game 4 in Boston, when Steph Curry goes for 43 and he was cool as a cucumber late in that game, like not worried. It was one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. Like Marcus Smart was fouling him on every single shot and he was just switching. They weren't even calling a foul, just switch. I was blown away by that. He single-handedly carried them to that Game 4 win and then eventually, to win the championship. And when I look at this Dallas team that they played, again, not to take anything away from the Celtics and what they've achieved, but they just didn't have the firepower. And Luka and Kyrie are great players, but they in no way, shape, or form were anywhere close to as impactful as Steph Curry was in 2022.
Yeah.
So that really is a huge difference in terms of just the level of competition that they were going up against. And also for this Dallas team, that was their first time in that environment. So there is a little bit of that inexperience. Whereas when we played the Warriors, they were even though they didn't have that same aura to them that they did maybe back in 2017, they were still the Golden State Warriors. They were still that dynasty. So there was that confidence and swagger that they brought in with them that the Mavericks definitely didn't have.
Yeah, man, I think that's a perfect segue to talk about the Mavs because, they're not obviously what that Warriors team was 2 years ago. And even Luka Doncic, for as great as he is already and as great as he's been in his young career, there's probably, you mentioned the levels, right? There's levels to this. There's probably another level that Luka Doncic does need to get to for a variety of reasons. But when you look at this Mavs team, they obviously figured something out this year in terms of the way they want to build around Luka and properly constructing around him, whether it was, getting a healthy year of Kyrie as their secondary guy, but also the trades for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford and how that, Washington, I don't think he's anyone's ideal third option on a finals team, but he was like a good tertiary scorer for them. And Gafford obviously really shored up their rim protection, trading for Lively on draft night and having him come in as a rookie. I think they figured some things out this year, obviously. But I think we'd all agree that there's probably more work that needs to be done if they want to get over the championship hump. So when you watch this team, as you watch them in the finals, after the trade deadline, in the playoffs, what do you think is still missing? Is it, another creator? Is it more scoring? What is it when you watch this team and you're like, they're good, but they're not quite there yet to actually win a title?
I think, first of all, I think Kyrie and Luka didn't play great in this series. And that's going to be the most impactful thing for any team is your two star players need to have great games in the biggest moments. And, for Kyrie, I felt like he was a little bit underwhelming at times, didn't shoot the ball great this entire series. And for Luka, Luka's a top 5 player in the NBA. He's phenomenal. People can say what they want about, maybe he's got to be in better shape. He could lose some weight, this and that. I think with Luka, there is a certain level of accountability that needs to be taken on the defensive end. And a lot of people have touched on this. I think Brian Windhorst, I saw him on ESPN really ripping into Luka. If they're going to win, he needs to be able to defend at least a little bit. And if you really focus in on his effort on the defensive end, that's what's lacking. It's the complaining to the refs. It's the falling down and not running back on defense. It's the, blow by after blow by to the rim. And now the defense is scrambling and making the next rotation. The good teams are going to pick you apart when they can just go one-on-one and blow right by you. So I think there just needs to be a little bit of accountability from Luka on that end. And again, I'm not here to sit, I'm not here to rip him apart. He's one of the greatest players to ever play. He's just absolutely talented, and I'm sure he'll figure it out. But there is that level of accountability that's going to need to be taken if he does want to reach that next level. And I'm sure it's going to be a little bit in the weight room. It's going to be losing some of that weight. I look back at 2020, the bubble, and you watch Luka Doncic highlights playing against the Clippers, and his body looked completely different. He was much more slim. He was quicker getting to the basket. He was taking contact better. And I think he's going to need to take that step in commitment in terms of diet and weight room work to get himself in that prime time shape. Like, you look at Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, those guys are in elite shape, like 4% body fat. They can run all day. And Luka just does not have that yet, at least.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some benefit of the doubt there with him just based on the fact that he was playing through myriad injuries, like getting pain injections before games in the finals. So he's playing through stuff and gutting it out. And I think the stuff with him losing focus maybe and complaining to the refs, like that falls on him 100%. And in terms of the defensive effort, I mean, Jason Kidd has like publicly called him out and said, he needs to take some pride and dig down and play defense. And so that message has been delivered and probably received. And I think, if they do want to get over that championship hump, I mean, the Celtics team was just tough, right? Like, that was going to be tough for anybody to get through. But the fact that they were able to come into the finals, I think, with like such a clear game plan and a way that they were going to wear him down, by saying, like, we're basically just going to switch everything and you're going to have to try and create everything one-on-one at the offensive end time and time and time again. And then at the other end of the floor, we're going at you. We're putting you in ball screen action over and over and over again. And you're going to have to either, fight hard to keep yourself out of a switch, or you're going to be switching on to Tatum, Brown, and they're going to be trying to take you off the bounce every single time. I mean, that was incredible game planning and incredible execution of that game plan by Boston. But I think, to your point, Nick, like the fact that they had the ability to kind of come in with that clear of a game plan to expose some of the limitations of the other team's best player, that became problematic for Dallas. But at the same time, I mean, they beat some damn good teams to get to the finals. I mean, 3 straight 50-plus win teams that, like, everybody's favorite to come out of the West in Denver. And then a team in Minnesota that I think, after beating Denver, a lot of people expected to take care of business against Dallas as well. And he might have just been out of gas. And maybe that does come down to just like improving his conditioning so that if they're able to make this kind of run again, he has a little bit more left in the tank to finish the job. Yeah.
And the Celtics just being this absolute buzzsaw, like you said, is a big part of it, right? And even like looking forward, there's, obviously a lot of promise with the Mavs. Just having Luka brings a lot of promise. But even if you look at this specific team, you can say every Maverick that logged a playoff minute except Derek Jones Jr. is under contract for next year. And you can be like, there's something to build here. They can be right back there. It's like you look on the other side, the top 8 Celtics players all under contract for next year. So it's not like I'm going to sit here and say, it's going to be the same finals next year. But I'm just saying, even if you're looking at who Dallas would likely have to beat from the other conference, they're going to be just as good.
Yeah. But so sorry, just because what you said before, Nick, about, there was maybe a difference, like mentality-wise, or like a little bit in terms of like skill level or tactics between 2022 and 2024. But at the end of the day, Steph just kind of went supernova, and there was like almost nothing you guys could do about it. I think to a certain extent, you could make that case about Dallas too. Like, they were a great team that had an amazing run and just ran into a team with very, very few weaknesses. And, you know, that is not necessarily a sign that, like, they're not going to be able to get to that level in the future. It just wasn't their time this year.
No, 100%. And I think a lot of what you see in the finals every year comes down to luck and, you know, being healthy at the right time, having your best players be healthy at the right time. Like I witnessed firsthand in 2022 when we played the Warriors in the finals. I mean, Marcus Smart you talk about getting pain injections. He was getting needles before every game. And then he would go chase Steph Curry around for 48 minutes. And I'll never forget one time Marcus Smart, his thumbnail got pulled all the way back. He came back to the bench. His thumbnail was pointed out the other way. I almost threw up looking at it. And the trainer came in and pushed the nail back in on the bench. And then Marcus Smart went right back out on the floor and continued to chase Steph Curry around. And I was like, this dude is so tough. I can't even imagine, because I would probably have not gone back in right away. I would have like taken a second to maybe regroup or whatever it was. But that's a lot of, you know, being in the NBA finals is you're probably not going to be fully healthy. And it really comes down to which team has more of their top guys at, you know, peak performance. And, you know, for Dallas, I think so much was riding on Luka being that guy. And for him to even be 10, 15% off of 100%, it's just not going to work. Like Dallas needed to be perfect in order to win this series. And I think that's a testament to it was Boston's time. You know, This is their time. And they got Tatum and Brown now entering their prime, and they're both going to be on the largest contracts in NBA history. They're not going anywhere. And now it's just going to really come down to, are those guys going to be healthy or injured come playoff time? Because if they're healthy, they will be there.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Nick, a little bit before we move off the finals topic, because you just did talk about those two guys that are going to be on the largest contracts in NBA history. And, you know, a little bit of a topic of conversation earlier in this finals was the whole Jalen versus Jason thing, because Jason Kidd came out and said Jalen Brown was their best player. I know Wolfond and I lean Tatum on this debate. Jason Kidd disagrees. Drew Holiday might disagree if you listen to his comments earlier in the finals. Like I said, you've been on a team with both these guys. You shared a locker room. Putting you on the spot here, if you could only pick one of them. I know you don't actually have to. Boston doesn't actually have to. But if you had to only pick one of them, which one would it be between the two Jays?
I would still pick Jason Tatum. And that's no knock on Jalen Brown. But I was actually a little bit surprised after the final game to see Jalen Brown get MVP. And not that he wasn't deserving of it. I thought he was great throughout the finals. But I think Jason's ability to impact the game in a lot of different areas. For example, the 11 assists last night, and really making the right reads, making the right plays, the right pass at the right time, trusting his guys. I think that's what would really give him the edge over Jalen. I mean, they're both elite scorers. They can do a lot of different things out there. They're both, you know, superstar level players. But I guess, you know, it's a good problem to have when you're, you know, comparing which two of our stars, our wing stars, are better. You know, they're both phenomenal players, and, you know, it's just goes to show they're going to be here for a while, and they're going to be the team that has to be ran through in order to win a championship for the foreseeable future. You know, it'd be one thing if those guys were turned 30, 31 right now, but they're in their mid 20s. Like they just figured out how to win, and now they got this 4, 5, 6 year prime window ahead of them. So it's a scary sight for the rest of the NBA, but also at the same time, I don't think the league has ever been as competitive and talented as it is right now. So it's always easy to, you know, fall back on what's new and what just happened and react to that. But we also have to understand that, you know, people were saying the same thing about the Nuggets last year after they won, you know, being like, oh, it's their run now, it's their league. It should be interesting to see how the league shapes out with especially all these young guys like, you know, Victor Wembanyama and Anthony Edwards coming into the league with a lot of hype around them as well.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing about that is, and this could obviously change, whether it's through like free agency transactions, a team like having kind of like, you know, the Pacers, for example, like coming out of nowhere and making a quantum leap. But like, it feels like there's all of this talent and parity in the Western Conference. I don't see a team right now some like rising juggernaut that is ready to challenge the Celtics in the East.
No.
Like the path for the next 3 odd years for them in the East seems like very clear to me.
Yeah.
I will say this though. That Pacers Celtics series, I mean, the Pacers were winning every game with 4 or 5 minutes left. They were winning, or at least within striking distance, every single game. So, yes, on paper they are nowhere close, but they really showed that they can compete at the highest level with the best teams. You know, I think even though the Pacers got swept, I think they put up a much better fight than Dallas did when you look at the overall series. So, again, on paper, I would agree with you that there is no one in the East right now that could really, you know, make that step forward and say we're the next contenders. But again, when the ball gets thrown up, the lights are turned on, anything can happen. And, you know, that's the beauty of it. Shout out to TJ McConnell. That's my boy. I mean, what a playoff run that he had. And I think he was probably one of the more impactful players in making that a tough series for the Celtics.
No doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we let you go, we want to talk a little Canada basketball with you. We know you were, once a big part of the program, and you were a part of a wave of Canadian talent that came into the NBA not too long ago. From your perspective, other than obviously just there's a lot more talent now coming out of Canada, what do you think is the biggest difference? And I don't know, maybe you can speak better to this than we can. Is it facilities? Is it funding for the national program? What do you think is the biggest difference other than just strictly the talent infusion coming out of Canada? Because it does seem like a much more legitimate program.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when I played in 2015 in the FIBA Americas, when I compare that team, which had a lot of NBA players like myself, Andrew Wiggins, Dwight Powell, Corey George, like we had good players on the team. We didn't have a potential MVP candidate in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And a lot of the times basketball comes down to who is your best player and how good can they be when it matters most. And having someone like that to fall back on when the other guys are missing shots is a huge difference maker. And, you know, it might be cliche and I'd be like, oh yeah, of course you're going to say Shai, but like, no, really, basketball can, I think more than any other sport, basketball is the game where if you have one really good player, you have a chance to win any game. And I think that's a huge difference for Canada basketball having him. And then second of all, I think it is a mindset thing where for the first time ever, really, I think there's just this unanimous belief that anyone can win. Like before, I think it was, Team USA, Spain, Argentina, you just knew who the top teams were going to be. And I think for the first time ever, the mindset has changed where people are like, no, they're not for sure. US isn't for sure going to beat us. Like they have to show up and play the same way that we do. And there used to be this fear to go up against Team USA and those top guys, whereas I don't think that fear exists anymore. And so that's a huge difference just coming in with the belief that it is possible. If you don't believe something can happen, it's never going to happen. And, when I think back to 2015 in the FIBA Americas, when I played for Canada, Team USA wasn't there. So we didn't have to go up against them. But I can promise you, if we did have to go up against, LeBron, Steph, KD, I mean, we would have lost by like 30, 40 points. We just didn't have that belief that we could overcome that. And I do think this group has that.
Not to make you revisit what's probably a painful memory for you, Nik, but you mentioned 2015 FIBA Americas. You guys have that semifinal game against Venezuela. You dusted them in the group stage, and you win that game, the semifinal, and you punch your ticket to the Olympics in 2016. I think you were up by like 7 points with 3 or 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, wind up losing by 1. And I guess I just wonder, watching Canada qualify for the 2024 games, what was that feeling like for you? I mean, was it pure joy, or was it a little bit bittersweet because you had hoped to have been part of that, in 2015 when you had that golden opportunity?
No bitterness at all. Like I was so happy for it's been a long time coming. Canada has been on the rise for so long now. It's a shame that it's taken this long for us to finally get back on the Olympic stage, because I do feel like we've been deserving of being on that stage for probably a decade now. But yeah, when I think back to 2015, that loss to Venezuela was definitely one of the most shocking and just astonishing moments of my entire basketball career. And what a lot of people don't know about this is I played maybe like the first 2 minutes of that game. The 24 hours leading up to that, I had the worst food poisoning of my entire life. I was in the hospital for the entire day, and I tried to play. And I think I like had a tip in, like a tip in layup, like very early in that game. And I was running up the court and then literally was on the verge of throwing up and having to go to the bathroom at the same time. And I'm like, I'm just of no use out here. So I sat the rest of the game out, but it was just one of those situations where everything that could go wrong went wrong. And, guys were missing shots. The other team gets hard at the right time. And, the foul call on the weak side rebound to end that game was very questionable, to say the least. But we didn't help ourselves by putting ourselves in such a tough position to close that out. But yeah, I would go as far to say if I could redo any game of my entire career, I would probably choose that game. Just because I truly believe that was like a 1 in 100. If we played them 100 times, I think they would beat us once, and that was their one win, and that hurt. It hurt a lot.
Yeah, it was devastating even for like Canadian basketball fans watching it. Now, obviously, like everyone's hoping for no devastation this summer with Canada in the Olympics. But when you look at what this team is, you mentioned having Shea, like a genuine MVP caliber talent leading the way. A team that's probably going to be, other than the U.S., the only team at the Olympics that's made up entirely of NBA players. Coming off a bronze medal at the FIBA World Cup, what do you think a realistic expectation should be for Canadian basketball fans? Because on one hand, it's like, we haven't been there in a long time, and maybe some are just happy to be there. On the other hand, you look at this team, it's like they should pretty comfortably be the second best team in the world. So I don't know, what is it, make the final, like silver medal or bust, gold medal game or bust? Is it podium or bust? Do you think those are unfair expectations on this team? What would you say is a realistic and fair expectation for this team?
Well, coming off the bronze medal in the FIBA qualifiers last year, I would say there's no reason why they shouldn't be aiming for that or better in the Olympics. Now, granted, I do think this Olympics will be the most competitive international basketball event in the history of the game. In terms of, there is so much talent all around the world. Every country is going to have a number of NBA players, all-star level guys. So there really is going to be, more than 3 or 4 contenders for the podium. There's going to be quite a few teams that are going to be able to compete at that level. And obviously Team USA will still be the favorite, especially with them bringing in their top guys and having Steph and LeBron and KD. I think they will still be the team to beat. But you look at this Canada roster, and they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who you can argue was maybe the best player in basketball this last year. You have the guy in Dylan Brooks, who can be the villain, bad boy, defender, whatever you need him to be. They got Dwight Powell, they have Kelly Olynyk, they have vets, they have the experience on the international level, experience in the NBA level. They really do check a lot of the boxes. It's really going to come down to, are guys going to be healthy? Are they going to bring their A game when it matters most? Because in a lot of these situations, it's, the one semifinals, it's a one game to get to the bronze or gold medal. And so you have one bad game at the wrong time and your tournament's over. So, bringing your A game at the right time is going to be huge. Being healthy at the right time is huge. But they got great problems to have in terms of, they're going to have tough decisions to make. If everyone shows up and is willing to play, who is going to make the roster, and then who's going to get the minutes? They're tough decisions to make, but it's a good problem to have. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and I guess here's hoping that this summer everything goes right for this team. You mentioned how that game against Venezuela, it felt like everything went wrong. I think Canada's due for a basketball summer where it feels like everything goes right. Yeah. So here's hoping this summer.
Here's hoping Dylan Brooks can shoot 70% from 3.
Yeah,
that would be nice.
That would help.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
For us, for my generation of players, like we grew up and, Vince Carter and the Raptors being in Toronto was huge for us getting into basketball. But I think this team has an opportunity to impact the country in a way that no team has ever been able to do. And obviously Steve Nash and that 2000 team, they were great. And, for Steve, like he always talks about that being one of his favorite moments of his entire career is being able to represent Canada in the Olympics. But, this team has a chance this summer to inspire young kids all across the country and give them that first basketball experience that's going to motivate them to, carry the torch, 15, 20 years down the road and continue to make Canada one of the best basketball countries in the entire world. So I get a little goosebumps when I'm like thinking of it that way, because there is just a huge opportunity on the world stage for these guys to represent for our country.
Yeah, and we can't wait to watch them in it. Nik, we really appreciate your time, man. Thanks for stopping by, talking NBA with us, talking Canada ball.
No, thank you, man. I appreciate you guys having me. And we need to find a way to bring back court cuts, man. I grew up on court cuts. That used to be my thing. We need to find a way to bring it back.
It's a score staple, man.
Agreed.
Score staple. All right. Thanks again, Nik.
Have a good one, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, as we were talking there with Nik just about the Celtics, the one thing I was thinking just before we get out of here, the one thing I was thinking is when we were having the Tatum versus Brown discussion, I was thinking like Jalen ends up winning Eastern Conference Finals MVP and Finals MVP. I know the Conference Finals MVP awards haven't been around that long, so we don't have. But if it had been around, I'm trying to think of like championship teams in history where their second best player would have been the best player in the Conference Finals and Finals. And that's not a knock on Tatum. It's just like probably shows how close the gap is between them. And maybe he's not the traditional like one, but they also have a better than traditional two. Like I don't know, it's funny how it works. Where this guy that we all clearly agree is their second best player, he ends up being Conference Finals MVP and Finals MVP.
Yeah, and I mean, like Nik said, it's a good problem to have, right? Like
that's for sure.
I think as long as that doesn't at any point kind of like infect the locker room or turn into like a thing where there's a schism between them because they're both trying to one-up each other, then that's just a great situation for them to be in, to have those two guys, two elite two-way wings locked in, in their primes, ready to kind of dominate the Eastern Conference for the foreseeable future. Like they've been together for 7 years. And in that time, they've won more regular season games than any team in the league, more playoff series than any team other than the Warriors. And like they're 26 and 27 years old. Like people can feel how they want about them. Like say, Tatum is not like a consensus top 5 player in the league, which in a way makes the Celtics kind of like an unconventional champion. But they are objectively already, like if they both retired tomorrow, they would be one of the most successful duos in the NBA in the 21st century. Yeah. And they're just entering their primes. Yeah. So they're in a good spot.
Yeah, it's wild to think of all they've accomplished and the fact that in a way they're still only just getting started. With, like I said, top 8 of this team locked in for next year. That great supporting cast around them. They'll still have the best top 6 in the league again next year. And so I think obviously a lot can happen. It's tough to win a title, but I think the 18-time champions should feel pretty good about them going into next year with probably the best odds to become 19-time champions. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that over the offseason and leading into next year. For now, for Joe Wolfond, for Nik Stauskas, I'm Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.